hearing of the Subcommittee on Rural Development Research, Biotech, and Foreign Agriculture to assess rural development programs in advance of the 2013 Farm Bill will come to order. Have a brief opening statement, not as brief as I'd like, but be what it is, to read before we start. Ask the minority spokesman, Mr. Costa, to do likewise. Afternoon and welcome to this hearing to review the rural development programs in advance of the 2012 Farm Bill. This is the first of 8 hearings which will be held by the various subcommittees to review federal farm policy before we begin drafting the reauthorization of ag programs. These subcommittee hearings are a continuation of the committee's work to gather information on farm policy. We've also conducted 11 audits of farm programs, 3 of which were held by this subcommittee, and 4 field hearings to gather input directly from producers across America. Today we're focusing on how the federal government makes investments in rural communities. While the infrastructure needs, such as water, wastewater, and broadband access, are similar throughout every town and city in America, small rural towns that make up a good part of our districts face unique challenges. Each Farm Bill seeks to address long-standing challenges and adopt new ones in the rural development title. Without a doubt, access to water, energy, and broadband infrastructure plays a critical role in each community's ability to create a competitive business environment. Even with the right infrastructure in place, limited access to credit and business training can impede the community's ability to develop and start new enterprises. And I might say parenthetically that at least 3 or 4 of us were here at a subcommittee hearing in Springfield, Illinois, where we specifically dealt and focused on the broadband issue. Very instructive and very helpful. Our staffs did a great job, and I hope we'll be able to integrate some of the input received in that into a final product. Today's discussion will take us across a wide range of issues as we look at the range of programs offered by the USDA. It is in part the sheer number of programs which makes it difficult to gauge the effectiveness of current policy. Just a few weeks ago, we heard testimony from GAO regarding the extent of duplication and fragmentation among federal agencies. As the committee considers how to reauthorize current programs, it seems prudent to also seek ways to weed out activities and authorities that are either redundant or ineffective. In doing so, these programs would be made more accessible to applicants, reduce USDA's administrative burden, and focus program resources on core responsibilities. As Congress looks to ways to address the deficit, scarce funds must be stretched to accomplish more than ever. Before us today are 2 panels comprised of organizations that assist rural America in a variety of ways, but are universally focused on developing the livelihoods and economies of virtually every rural town and county. As partners and implementers of USDA programs, our witnesses will be able to provide an in-depth discussion on the Farm Bill and ways to strengthen our approach to rural economic development. The first panel includes representatives of co-ops, counties, and development organizations whose members are found in every corner of the country. Among the issues we hope to address with our first panel is the fragmentation of programs, challenges to regional coordination, and ways to improve program applications. Our second panel will focus on infrastructure programs and how our water, wastewater, and telecommunications programs are functioning. Particularly in light of budget constraints, we hope to receive additional feedback on how the programs can be adjusted to reach more communities with the given resources. We appreciate the time that each of the witnesses has given us to prepare their testimony. The testimony received today will be significant as we begin the process to reauthorize the Farm Bill. With that, I'd like to turn to my friend and colleague from California, the ranking member, Mr. Costa, for a statement as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership and your comments. And let me take this opportunity, since this is the first subcommittee hearing that we've held, since your announcement, regretfully, to make this your last term in serving the people of Illinois and as a distinguished member of the House. We appreciate all of the good work that you've done over the years and the hard work that you've done on behalf of your constituents, as well as a terrific member of the House Agriculture Committee. Your focus and your care are well known, and the sacrifices you and your family have made so you could serve the people of our United States is truly appreciated. So let me thank you again on behalf of all the members of the subcommittee and our colleagues for a job well done, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with you before the end of this year is out.
Let me just say a very sincere thanks to you for not only the comments, but for the wonderful partnership that we've created on this subcommittee and the input and role that you play, which is overwhelmingly appreciated, and your friendship is as well. So those comments are especially important to me, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Let me open on my statement. This hearing is important, as all the hearings that this subcommittee has held, as it relates to the first title, the rural development title, as the Farm Bill, and the organizations that are going to testify in terms of your input and as it relates to the United States Department of Agriculture's rural development programs, which I think the members of the subcommittee believe are critical as we reauthorize the 2012 Farm Bill. Rural America, as we all know, comprises 3/4 of the nation's land, and it's home to more than 50 million people. The rural development programs in this title help the interests and the prosperity, therefore, of those communities that we represent. These programs, authorized by the Rural Development title of the Farm Bill, support an array of public facilities and services. In addition, rural development programs have allowed communities to apply for loans, loan guarantees, and grants, which are critical throughout rural America. Over the course of nearly 80 years since the Great Depression, the landscape of rural America, obviously, as we all know, has changed greatly. Our nation's policy related to rural America have also changed. And even as manufacturing and service sectors have replaced some agricultural production as dominant economic forces in some of rural America, we know that there are a lot of commonalities that rural America share together, including the bountiful harvest of American agriculture. As we look at the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, it is, I think, my belief that this subcommittee and the full committee should look closely at what it means to be rural in the 21st century and how increasingly limited federal resources are that can be leveraged to assist our rural communities. In February 2011, we held a hearing of this subcommittee examining the definition of rural as it applies to the USDA programs. However, to date, sadly, we still have not received the report promised by the United States Department of Agriculture clarifying that definition. Please, Secretary Vilsack, if you're hearing this anywhere, members of the USDA, if you're hearing this anywhere, we'd like to get the report. In fact, my congressional district is one of the most productive agricultural regions in the country. And many of our communities not only are rural, but many of my communities are poor and disadvantaged. Despite the clear need, my district struggles with eligibility requirements under the rural development programs, as, for example, whether or not rural housing, health, or essential community facilities can be included largely because of the criteria used to define what rural means. Establishing a nationwide definition of rural presents challenges, I understand, regionally from the south to the northeast to the Midwest to the west. However, it seems to me that we ought to be able to work through this. We have a very able state director with USDA who's here in the audience today, Dr. Glenda Humison, who I work with on a regular basis. She just told me that in looking at the 2011 census data, as an example, 98 communities in California will no longer be deemed as falling under the definition of rural, which more tragically or unsatisfyingly for many of my colleagues represents 80% of their loan portfolio. So with the new definition, because of population increases that have taken place, 98 communities in California will no longer be considered rural, and that impacts 80% of the loan portfolio, as the state director just informed me. And by the way, I want to thank Dr. Glenda Humison for doing a terrific job that she does. I think everyone here, our witnesses included, would be hard-pressed to come up with a singular definition. I know that's tough, that accurately portrays what it means to be rural in every state. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, I do not believe. Recent farm bills have updated the definition of rural, so I look forward to hearing the witnesses' view on how we might address this issue. If more of our rural communities can be better served with a different set of criteria or a different regionally based approach, then let's hear about it. before we reauthorize the 2012 Farm Bill. That said, Mr. Chairman, I'm particularly interested in hearing from representatives of the telecommunications organizations responsible in delivering broadband services to consumers in rural communities, connecting rural America to what we know as a global economy. Whether it's in my home state of California or anywhere between, federal programs and private service providers have made great strides in deploying broadband. The hearing that you mentioned in Illinois that the subcommittee held last year brought that out in terms of the access to broadband, and you had some very good witnesses that testified. I want to highlight a few California figures that illustrate why the issue of rural broadband is so important, not just in my district, but in states and communities all across rural America. When you think of California, and I know there people have a lot of different thoughts when they think of California, but oftentimes it's Silicon Valley, it's high-tech sector, are probably many things that come to mind. According to a 2008 report, California Broadband Task Force, we are a leading state in broadband penetration. However, that figure is misleading. The same report found that 1.4 million rural Californians lacked access to broadband, and barely half the state's residents have broadband access at home. For these households with annual incomes of $25,000 or less, many in my district, the situation is even bleaker, with less than a quarter of the households subscribing to broadband. What this shows me is that despite relative success in putting wires in the ground, the federal government and private sector broadband providers, public institutions still have a lot of work to do in bridging the divide between the haves and the have-nots. And let me tell you why I think this is so important, especially in rural America, because we are closely reaching our ability to have access, our capacity on broadband. American agriculture is at the cutting edge around the world in this broadband technology, as it relates to irrigation technologies, as it relates to tillage technologies. Broadband's being used to make our farmers more efficient, more effective. Yet when you limit their capacity or the broadband capacity for American farmers, dairymen, and ranchers, it has an economic impact in this global economy that they have to compete in. Finally, Mr. Chairman, research is an important task of the subcommittee and the separate title of the Farm Bill, and I just want to take a moment to speak on that. Research has been a core of the United States Department of Agriculture for nearly 150 years since the Department of Agriculture was created, particularly through our land grants institutions, and many of us represent land grants institutions. Research driven by the United States Department of Agriculture has helped ensure safe, abundant, and affordable food supply and fiber that has not only made American farmers and farm households thrive, but be among the very best in the entire world. Equally important to these efforts is the research conducted by even many of our non-land grant agricultural schools, such as my alma mater, Fresno State, Go Bulldogs, which is one of the premier ag schools in the West. I'm sure it comes as no surprise by many of my colleagues that particular interest is the research being conducted in specialty crops research initiative that many of us fought very hard for in the 2008 Farm Bill. It was created there for the purpose of continuing to expand that. It expires this year. Specialty crops represent approximately half of the United States agricultural exports without support from Title I in the Farm Bill. So it's an assistance through technical programs such as market access, such as specialty crops research initiative, such as efforts for pest detection and eradication. I can get it out, I know I can. Pest detection and eradication that help us thrive when we deal with infestations. So I look forward to the reauthorization and working together on a bipartisan basis in the Farm Bill. It's critically important that competitive research dollars remain available to our institutions throughout the United States to support American agriculture. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses who participated in the rural development programs and their views and their proposals about how we can maintain and strengthen the United States Department of Agriculture's largely successful rural development programs in a cost-saving environment that we know that we're in as we reauthorize the 2012 Farm Bill. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I spoke longer than I should have, but I had a lot to say this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. I know you didn't speak too long. In fact, your comments are right on point, and I really appreciate them. Our first panel today is comprised of three individuals, all of whom are highly regarded in their area. Mr. Chuck Connor, my friend and President and CEO of the National Council of Farmer Co-ops, former Secretary of Agriculture. Mr. Don Larson, Commissioner, Brookings County, South Dakota, on behalf of the National Association of Counties, and Leanne Mazer, I believe, the Executive Director of the Tri-County Council for Western Maryland, Frostburg, Maryland, speaking on behalf of the National Association of Development Organizations. So with that, Mr. Connor, the floor is yours.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the nearly 3,000 farmer-owned cooperatives and their producer members, we appreciate the opportunity to testify today. Rural development programs are intended to bolster rural communities and position them to better compete in a global environment. As such, it is important that USDA rural development programs focus on agriculture and farmer co-ops as the foundation for helping encourage and support rural economies. There are more than 88 programs administered by 16 different federal agencies specifically targeted at rural economic development. With a significant decrease in funding for Farm Bill programs, coupled with declining USDA resources to administer those very programs, it just makes sense to us to consolidate the programs that all have the same objective. It takes the same amount of staff time, Mr. Chairman, to administer a $1 million program as it takes to administer a $100 million program. At the same time, the requirements for applying for grants have become overly complicated and too burdensome, and have spawned a cottage industry for consultants. Some feedback I've received from my members is that while they're interested in applying for a rural development grant, they don't have the resources to navigate the process. And the time and energy required to apply isn't worth the amount of funds they would be eligible for in the end. Simplifying the application process would lead to more applications, resulting in better projects. That said, Mr. Chairman, the Value Added Producer Grants Program has been successfully utilized by farmer co-ops. I have specific examples provided by several NCFC members that I would ask at this point be submitted for the record. The program has been instrumental in helping co-ops overcome many barriers faced when developing new products for the marketplace, one of which is working capital. This is particularly acute for advanced planning that requires substantial capital investment or commitment of resources up front. The program has helped producers launch new agricultural products through their co-ops, both domestically and internationally. Having access to value-added producer grants allows co-ops to capitalize on new business opportunities that would otherwise simply go unexplored. These successful products have resulted in more stable income from the marketplace for producers. The program is administered on a matching fund basis, thereby doubling the impact of such grants and helping encourage investment in ventures that ultimately benefit all of rural America. Co-ops bring many producers, Mr. Chairman, together who individually do not have the size, expertise, or resources to take advantage of the value chain beyond their own farm gate, and gives them the opportunity to profit from those downstream activities. NCFC strongly believes that co-ops, by spreading the benefits of value-added producer grants among a large number of producers, can give the American taxpayers the greatest bang for their buck. In 2011, USDA made significant improvements to the program rules that recognize those very benefits that I described. NCFC supports those changes and asks that they carry through in this Farm Bill reauthorization process. Another area of interest to many of my members is the Cooperative Services Program. Over time, that program area has lost many of its experienced professional staff. At one time, the program housed well over 100 employees, but today that number is less than 10. We're not advocating for additional staff, but we do want to see the resources that exist better spent. For example, there are many research needs that cooperative services could provide that would be specifically beneficial to NCFC and our member cooperatives. But currently, much of that research is simply not being done. We often hear from NCFC members that are searching for timely and complete statistics on farmer co-ops. There is an evident lack of complete and timely research on the impact of farmer co-ops on rural economies, and those lacking items include number of farmer co-ops and their location, number of employees, aggregate payroll amounts, farmer co-op market share of various commodities, and of course the patronage dividends that we return to our farmer owners. In addition, we encourage cooperative services to revisit and update the very useful legal and tax publications that have been a cornerstone of cooperatives in the past. NCFC does seek inclusion of report language better directing the focus of USDA's cooperative services and looks forward to working with this committee in this regard. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to testify before your subcommittee today and look forward to answering questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Connor. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee for our opportunity to speak to you today. I'm Don Larson. I'm a county commissioner from Brookings County, South Dakota, and I serve as chair of the National Association of Counties Ag and Rural Affairs Steering Committee. And I'm honored to bring the collective perspective of our nation's counties as I represent NACO today. A vast majority of our nation's 3,068 counties are rural. Therefore, a new farm bill with emphasis on rural development is critical to our American counties. Today, we're talking about America's food, fiber, and renewable energy fuels producers and their local economies. Before I get into the details of the testimony, I want to thank the leadership and the membership of the House Ag Committee for your commitment to passing the Farm Bill this year. My testimony, Mr. Chairman, I want to make 3 points, which I lay out in more detail in the written comments provided. First, the lack of sufficient and coordinated infrastructure development and capital are 2 critical obstacles to economic development and competitiveness in small town and rural America. USDA's broad range of rural development programs should be made a priority in the Farm Bill because they're a critical source of grant and loan funding that is leveraged by rural business, rural communities, and rural people to overcome these challenges and create jobs. The programs that assist communities with financing of water infrastructure, community facilities, electric utilities, and broadband deployment are the basic building blocks all communities need to compete. Water and community facilities programs are consistently ranked as the most critical. Rural business programs all increase capital availability and help counties play their important role as intermediaries and technical assistance providers. Most importantly, the Rural Development title helps rural communities improve economic opportunity and quality of life. The bipartisan Beginning Farmer and Rancher Opportunity Act, H.R. 3236, provides a model that NACO supports for the kind of initiatives necessary to invest in the next generation of American producers. The Rural Development title also provides critical support to new and beginning farmers through its ability to finance the infrastructure necessary for local and regional food systems. This growing sector will be enhanced by the NACO-supported Local Farms, Food, and Jobs Act, H.R. 3286. NACO supports maintaining the $150 million in mandatory funding provided in the 2008 Farm Bill. The second key point is that rural people, businesses, and communities are increasingly operating in dynamic regional economies, and USDA rural development programs must be reshaped to more locally driven strategic regional approach. The importance of federal investments in regional planning and project implementation is clear in eastern South Dakota. My county partnered with the city of Brookings, the county of Brookings, South Dakota State University, our state, and our university research park creation, the first one in South Dakota. And our innovation campus provides a place where people and ideas are coming together to enhance the economic vitality of our region. We use the ability of our First District Association of Local Governments to develop a business plan and regional strategy with federal EDA funding. These planning investments provided vital gap funding that helped make our regional vision a reality. EDA got this project off the ground. USDA, the main federal partner in rural America, is not structured to make this kind of success story happen. Currently, USDA rural development programs all too often are structured to serve individual communities rather than a larger county and multi-jurisdictional facility and regional strategies and goals. Funding decisions are based on the best written application as determined by federal officials, not state and local actors. We suggest the next Farm Bill direct the Secretary of Agriculture to give priority to projects that demonstrate collaboration and cooperation at the local and regional level. Our towns, cities, and counties can no longer afford to compete in a race to the bottom. Rather, we are learning that cooperation and collaboration best utilize limited resources. Incentivizing projects that involve collaboration across jurisdictions is smart policy and supported by rural America. Our last point is the Campaign for Renewed Rural Development is a collaboration of 35 national organizations with a sincere interest in rural America's future that is united in 6 key priorities for the next rural development title. Those are mentioned in my previous report to you. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here as your partner, and we want to work with you to recreate some of these things. And we know if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to get what we got. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Ms. Mazur.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Leanne Mazur, and I'm the Executive Director of Tri-County Council for Western Maryland, located in Frostburg, Maryland. I would respectfully like to make 3 points. First, Mr. Chairman, the mission area of USDA rural development is critical to our nation's rural and most distressed areas as they work to develop the fundamental building blocks necessary to be economically viable and competitive. During challenging fiscal times, it's often easy to forget the real impact of these programs like USDA rural development. I'd like to briefly tell you about a couple examples of the work we've accomplished with these programs in my region. With the financing package that included a USDA loan, one of our counties was able to construct a new water line that opened up a new business park for advanced manufacturing. Very soon thereafter, cabinet manufacturer American Woodmark moved in, immediately creating 120 new quality manufacturing jobs. The company has continued to grow and now employs about 330 people. In 2005, our agency assumed the management of an IRP fund from another organization within our region. This offered us one other financing tool to provide access to capital for our business community. Recognizing that our region had a need for professional, hands-on business counseling and technical assistance for our local entrepreneurs and businesses, we were also successful in securing 2 USDA Rural Business Enterprise grants in the following 2 years. During the period of our RBEG investments, our counselor assisted 196 businesses and resulted in $12.7 million in projects developed. Tri-County Council's business counselor assisted one of those companies in developing a business plan with financial projections to support a much-needed manufacturing facility expansion. The company's growth was limited by their existing plant size. We helped that company successfully put together a financing package that included $400,000 in gap financing from our agency, with a total project cost of just over $2 million. The company continues to grow today and has been able to increase their annual sales substantially. Second, Mr. Chairman, our nation's rural communities are facing enormous pressure from global competitors. Therefore, it's imperative that USDA rural development has the policies, program tools, and flexibility to assist rural communities and regions. We believe that this can be achieved by USDA facilitating regional collaboration and strategic investments through existing regionally focused, locally driven frameworks like the U.S. Economic Development Administration's Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, or CEDS process. Just last week, our region was pleased to see the completion of a major project that could demonstrate how we use our CEDS locally. The City of Frostburg utilized a USDA water and waste disposal loan, along with other federal, state, and local programs and partners, to complete a major water distribution project that provides reliable, clean water to over 5,300 homes and businesses. The project also included a hydroelectric plant that now generates electric savings for the city. Because our region made this project a priority many years ago during our CEDS and planning processes, all 3 of our counties and all 24 municipalities were committed to its success. Therefore, I would urge a greater recognition and support of existing regional development strategies, including the EDA SEDS, that could assist rural development in making sound decisions with their investments. Finally, Mr. Chairman, USDA rural development applications, policies, and reporting requirements should be streamlined to reflect the scale of the rural investments, emerging needs, and opportunities of rural regions. Western Maryland is much like other rural regions across America. Communities and small businesses in our region often lack the staff capacity to apply for and manage USDA rural development programs. This is unfortunate since programs like USDA rural development were established specifically for these communities. Rural development should consider a process to identify the current concerns felt by their customers and enter into a program of continuous evaluation and improvement for the purposes of maximizing program impact. Rural development should also consider establishing stronger connections to entities like regional development organizations and counties to provide technical assistance to rural communities, small businesses, and entrepreneurs. In closing, I urge your continued support of the USDA rural development programs and funding in the 2012 Farm Bill. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today, and I would welcome any questions.
Opening questions, I'd call on the ranking member, Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Connor, Secretary Connor, formerly, thank you for your service to our country. You talked about the value-added producer grant. As I understand we have it for mandatory funding up until the fiscal year 2017, if I'm correct. I think it's been successful, not only in helping cooperatives overcome constraints on necessary capital to innovate and process new commodities and product packaging that we use to export around the world. But additionally, you mentioned that cooperatives are in the best position to efficiently spread the benefits to a larger number of producers. However, I was looking at some of the numbers since the 2008 Farm Bill, and after 298 recipients of the value-added producer grants, only 26 of them went to cooperatives. Why did so few go to them if, according to your testimony, you're in the best position to do them?
It's a great question. Mr. Costa, let me just say I think your numbers are accurate, and I would further add that I believe there was a period of time where 80% of the value-added producer grants were being used by cooperatives. So there's a substantial decline that has occurred there over time. And as I said in my oral testimony, I shared with you a firsthand experience we had where when the program funds were available, we notified our membership of that process, and again, as I stated.
Yeah, I know, but the decline, I'm just trying to get a sense of why there's been the decline and what might be done, because I'm a big supporter of cooperatives. Yep. I have a number of cooperatives, dairy and fruit cooperatives that have been long, not only in California, but throughout the country. And I think value added is very important. That's why I would want to support the grants. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on.
Well, let me get right to the point then. The response from many when these funds became available was that the application process required too many resources on their part for a relatively small benefit. And all right. It was not worth it.
Then let me segue to the other comments I made in my opening statement. That is that for all three of you, my concerns about rural definitions, and I wonder whether or not any of the three of you would speak to ideas that you could suggest to the USDA on how Congress could better define rural and provide the agency flexibility it needs to address needs throughout the nation in terms of rural communities, because as I said, I don't think one size fits all. And in some areas, for example, again, we all know our own situation best, but in California, we've tried to encourage smarter growth in our cities, in part to protect our agricultural lands. We've asked cities to grow and not to spread on some of our prime ag land. And as a result of that, it's created population densities under the definition of rural that now then comes back and penalizes us. This has been something that's not new, wrestling with the definition of rural. To my two, the gentleman from NACO and the other gentlelady, have any comments that you'd like to make as it relates to rural definition?
Well, Ranking Member, I think we share the same dilemma that you share. And we don't have at this moment a better idea for the definition of rural, albeit we understand and we appreciate fully the experience you have in your home county, and that you're not the only situation like that across the country where you see some growth, but rural areas are attached. And but the best I can say is that I share the dilemma at this moment, and I don't have the perfect answer, because as we approach the regionalization of our efforts to better expend the federal dollars that are available to us,
Okay.
and we take in more people.
Ms. Mazur, do you have a comment, suggestion?
Ranking Member Costa, NATO is a broad-based organization too, so I really can't comment as far as I'm not in a position to represent a definition, a population number to define rural, but I could talk about my region.
Ideas.
Okay, I could talk about my region for a little bit. We have 3 counties I mentioned and 24 municipalities and a total population of about 250,000. Our smallest community is about 80 citizens, and we have 2 cities that one is right at the threshold at 21,000 for community facilities grants, and our other largest city is 37,000 in population. While we see the struggles of our small towns, we also see the struggles in our largest city. They're different struggles. And we use regional planning and the process of continuous regional planning, where we bring our region's leaders together on a voluntary basis several times a year, every year, in a continuous process to try to see how we can address those issues that they're all facing, those struggles they're all facing from both ends of the population spectrum. I will tell you, that being said, when we put those leaders in the room, our elected officials, our chambers of commerce, our business people, our education leaders, they will come to consensus, and they do look at how we can make the best progress and the most progress for the region.
Yeah, no, and I think your example is not unusual compared to all the districts we represent. Thanks. My time's expired, but just for the members' information, Fresno County is the largest agricultural county in the nation, over $6 billion a year. But the city of Fresno now has over 500,000 people in it. So we're the 5th largest city in the state. And because of that fact, even though we're the #1 agricultural county in the nation in terms of farm gate receipts, we're obviously very much handicapped by the 15 cities that surround in different parts of Fresno County and the small hamlets that are not incorporated. Anyway, that's part of the dilemma we're dealing with.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner Larson, I listened to what you said, and, if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to get what we got. I guess my fear as a new member of Congress is if we keep doing what we're doing, we might lose what we have in America. And I guess just a simple question. You're a county commissioner, so you're out there where the rubber meets the road with the American citizen. And you have to balance the budget in your county on an annual basis?
Yes, we do.
Yes, sir. What would happen if you didn't balance it on an annual basis?
Well, obviously, the answer would be that over a continued time frame, the ultimate route would be bankruptcy.
Yes, sir. I'll tell you, I've found that local people like yourself do a much better job of managing tax dollars than we do up here in Washington. So I want to thank you for coming up here and testifying, and I do hope that, Mr. Chairman, we're able to get more of these decisions made at the the local level where the rubber meets the road. Thank you for what you're doing.
I thank you sincerely. Thank you.
I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you. And the lady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member of the subcommittee. Thank you, witnesses, for your testimony. The idea of promoting a regional approach to rural development has been promoted by the USDA and encouraged by Secretary Vilsack in his regional initiative, innovation initiative, which sets aside significant funds from across the rural development programs for regional projects. I have the pleasure of representing my home district, which includes a lot of rural areas of Alabama. And we are a big benefactor of the Delta Regional Authority, so I'm very supportive of the regional approach to better leveraging limited resources to better impact both our rural communities directly as well as infrastructure development that really helps the whole communities as a whole. However, one concern that is shared by some is how more regional approach will adversely impact those those rural communities that are not a part of or cannot or do not have the ability to be a part of regional planning because of the dispersed nature of those communities. Please elaborate on some of the benefits and challenges associated with a more regional focus on rural development, and how would you work to overcome any of these identified challenges to a regional approach for communities that are more spread out? And I open that up to all three witnesses.
Well, ma'am, I approach it in our discussions that the regional concept is a good way to go to involve communities, and regions are about as difficult to define as rural probably. But for a specific project, you could have a large region, another project is a smaller region, meaning a group of communities or citizens have to work together to create the project. That the project is designed to create a better quality of life for beyond just one small community. Always understanding that in rural America we have remote areas, and this type of cooperation and collaboration is probably impossible. And those people should then have the same opportunity to apply as a regional and be given the same type of preference.
Yes, sir. Any other comments?
No, I would agree with that.
When we're talking about limited resources, rural development, and I know it's spearheaded by Doug O'Brien for Secretary Vilsack, and he does a remarkable job of being attentive to rural communities. But in your opinion, I'd be interested in hearing your perspective as to what rural development programs have proven the most effective and which programs have been proven least effective. In this kind of economic environment, it's always important to listen to those people who are directly impacted and actually try to use those programs directly. So I'd be interested in knowing which rural development programs have been the most beneficial.
Congresswoman, in the material that I submitted for the record, I gave examples of 3 different co-ops that have used the Value-Added Producer Grant Program, which is a matching program, public and private, to bring about good things for their farmer owners. Probably the best example that we put forward is one of Blue Diamond almonds, mm-hmm. where literally these funds are being used for market development, and this is an enormous growth industry in the state of California, and in a state where other industries are not necessarily growing. This is a remarkable growth story. A big part of it can be attributed to these value-added grants.
Any suggestions as to programs that have been less effective? And I'd obviously love to hear from our commissioner, since you're on the front lines, of programs that have been effective for rural development.
Well, ma'am, the programs that are most effective and most needed in rural America, and I speak as nationwide, are always references to water, wastewater, broadband,
infrastructure,
infrastructure, and then rural facilities, and specifically more those to accommodate health care. In rural areas, we need a place that we can treat someone until the emergency facilities are there, whether it be helicopter, ambulance, whatever.
Absolutely. Critical care centers, yeah.
Critical care.
Mm-hmm.
And the broadband is going to have the impact just as on rural America, just like electricity did.
Great. Well, thank you all. I yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you. I might mention to the members of the subcommittee, if it's my hope, goal to make sure we get both panels in the subcommittee hearing concluded before we go to the floor, so we don't have to truncate the process. I'm not trying to speed anybody out, but it's a lot more instructive, I think, when we can go in a straight through. With that, I'd call on the lady from Missouri, Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would add my comments to the ranking member, thanking you for your service and wishing you well, and saying it's been an honor and is an honor to serve with you here. Would like to start with Mr. Connor. Your testimony was very interesting. How you pointed out, there's 88 programs administered by 16 different federal agencies. Specifically targeted at rural development, and that consolidation is warranted. I was just wondering, do you have some examples of some specific agencies or departments or programs that you think would be a good thing to consolidate?
Well, Congresswoman Hertzler, let me just answer your question this way. Obviously, we believe that the U.S. Department of Agriculture Agency for Rural Development Agency is the right place, and they are the people that have, if you will, boots on the ground out in the field to actually successfully administer these programs. And so in that process, we would certainly strongly encourage a continued relationship with that agency that has the people out there who are in the rural communities, know the projects, know who's behind them, know the quality of those projects. And I'm not sure that exists with all of the agencies that I mentioned, but we would certainly encourage continued use of the people with boots on the ground.
Can you give me an example of a program that is in a different agency that is also in USDA that you think we could pull back totally under USDA's jurisdiction?
Well, pulling back totally probably is farther than what I'm prepared to go in terms of good advice for you. But certainly this committee can explore a number of different opportunities in housing, the programs that I've mentioned with value-added producer grants. These are things that are occurring elsewhere as well. And, we have found these programs, again, we've offered criticisms, but yet, we want to continue to see them operated and funded through USDA Rural Development Agency.
Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Larson, several of you have mentioned the importance of the infrastructure grants and the loans to rural communities, and certainly as I travel around my district, that is something that is very important, and it's needed with wastewater and water treatment facilities, especially as it relates to the EPA's changing rules and specifications. Older infrastructure, whether it be sewer lines or water lines in these small towns, and they rely on these loans. I was just wondering, do you have an idea of the amount of need that's out there, the dollar-wise, for this type of infrastructure versus how much money is available currently for these programs?
No, ma'am, I do not have a dollar estimate for you, but I can sympathize and agree with your comment, the fact that there is a great need out there in rural America, and there's going to be a continuing need if we hope to grow and expand the rural economy with value-added projects and so forth, because we need these other types of important infrastructure to facilitate those communities that are fortunate enough to have this type of economic development happen.
Mm-hmm. These small towns just don't have the money that it takes to replace to upgrade their sewer plants or to do what needs to be done according to the regulations. It's putting them in a very difficult position. And so I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that. So I'll withhold further comments due to the time, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Looking at the panel here, I've always wondered what one-party rule would be like. Ever see the Woody Allen movie, guys? I missed them, though. I would then recognize the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Chairman, and join my colleagues in also saying thanks for your leadership. Ms. Mazur, you mentioned the importance of preparing our workforce with new skills in your testimony. What specific Farm Bill programs do you support and believe help with this?
I'm not sure of a specific answer to that as far as workforce skills from an actual, community facilities. We've used community facilities loans and grants in building one of the first new high schools in our county in 50 years. So, we could talk about it from the bricks and mortar and infrastructure type of perspective, but we could also talk about the impact of regional planning and truly looking regionally. And one of the examples that I can share from my region is, again, we're a regional entity made up, our board is made up of county commissioners, educators, chambers of commerce, business leaders. Our educational institutions had for a long time professional staff and association. There's 3 K through 12 schools, there's 3 community colleges, a state university, and then a university system of Maryland. And they approached us because we were the regional platform. They were struggling with maintaining staff. So we took over the management of the consortium. We now have a virtual educational consortium where we can bring those leaders together to talk about the educational needs. They can work together. They can pursue joint opportunities. It's also a direct link then between economic development and education.
So what is the tie then within your model between, obviously it sounds like you're blessed with, for a rural region, you're blessed with different educational entities.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have is there a good solid tie back to the rural employers so that their workforce needs are clearly understood, constantly monitored, and that's kind of that need is what drives what you do with that area?
Yes, absolutely. There's a very close connection. We work together very closely. We also have an organization made up of private sector CEOs, and it's called in Allegheny County, in the center of our region, it's called the Greater Cumberland Committee. We have the Greater Hagerstown Committee in Washington County. The Greater Cumberland Committee actually has a program where they bring businesses and our educational community together as well.
Great, thank you. Mr. Connor, can you discuss the success of the farm cooperatives and what kind of benefits that they tend to provide rural communities and American agriculture? How they differ from other businesses, and frankly, is there and with those cooperatives, I'm assuming these are strongly member driven, and how do we make sure that I've had a lot of discussion, I've heard a lot of discussion, especially on the dairy side, of member concerns of that they're member driven, but they feel like they don't have a lot of input. So how does that work in terms of how can we ensure that our farm cooperatives are strongly member driven?
Well, let me I do believe our farm-owned co-ops are member-driven because obviously those co-ops are managed by a board of directors that, for the most part, is elected by those farmer members of that co-op. And
Certainly in my case, I've never observed a circumstance where those farmer leaders were shy about making their views known if they thought the direction of the co-op was headed different than what they preferred. Things change pretty rapidly again because the people that own the co-op, the people that vote on the leadership, on the management of that co-op, are indeed the very farmer members who make up that co-op, and that creates a system that is very, very responsive to those farmer members.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Lawson, which rural development program do you think has in your opinion, has the best return on investment in terms of putting federal dollars through the Farm Bill into a rural economic development program? Which one do you think has the best return on investment coming back for the taxpayers?
Well, I'm glad that you review them as investments because that's what they are.
Sure.
They're an investment, not an expense. And I would have to say that in my opinion, that good water and wastewater treatment facilities are very important to rural America. And I don't mean just small towns, but our rural water systems that serve the rural areas.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and thanks for your comments here on the panel. I really appreciate that. With that, and I don't believe there's any second round of questions, I appreciate your being here, ladies and gentlemen, and look forward to seeing you again. We call on the second panel to come on forward. While they're doing that, I want to indicate that along with the testimony that we're about to receive from the second panel, I have a letter submitted by the U.S. Telecom Association, and unless there's objection, I would ask that it be made part of the record. So ordered. And so the second panel, as they're assembling, is comprised of Frank Dunmeyer, who's actually from my part of the state, was actually in Taylorville a week ago Saturday at the VFW. Mr. Dunmeyer is the Executive Director of the Illinois Rural Water Association on behalf of the National Rural Water Association. Mr. Robert Stewart, Executive Director, Rural Community Assistance Partnership. Mr. David Roselle, Executive Vice President of the Sudden Link Communications St. Louis on behalf of the National Cable Telecommunications Association. And Mark Bonson, CEO and General Manager, Bloomingdale Communications, Bloomingdale, Michigan, on behalf of the National Telecommunications Co-Operative Association. With that, then, we ask that the panelists speak in the order I recognize them. First, Mr. Dunmeyer.
Thank you. Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for holding today's hearing. Like Mr. Chairman said, I'm Frank Dunmeyer, the Executive Director of Illinois Rural Water Association, and in the interest of time, I will summarize my written statement. But before I get too far along into my testimony, I would like to thank Chairman Johnson for his service to Illinois. Since the chairman began his career in the public service in 1971, he has been a champion of the farmers and the rural communities in our state, and we wish him well as he leaves the House of Representatives and returns home to his family in Illinois. Thank you, Tim. The Illinois Rural Water Association is a member of the National Rural Water Association, on whose behalf I am testifying this afternoon. NRWA represents over 28,000 small rural water systems, of which 1,100 of those are located in Illinois. Everyday rural water helps communities properly operate, maintain, and manage their water and wastewater systems, ensure compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act, and when necessary, respond to natural disasters. Last year, rural water provided over 155,000 hours of on-site assistance to rural water and wastewater systems throughout the country. Everyone realizes the importance of water. It's not until you turn on the tap and nothing comes out that you begin to understand how complicated life becomes without easy access to water. Water quality and affordability are important factors for businesses wanting to locate or remain in a rural community. Many times, job creation is directly tied to the availability of a good supply of potable water. An excellent example of this is located in southwestern Illinois at the Prairie State Energy Campus. This project created over 3,000 construction jobs, and it will create 500 permanent on-site jobs and 800 support sector jobs. But what most people don't know is that all of the potable water supply needs for this facility are being met by Washington County Water Company, a water cooperative funded through rural development. As a lender of last resort, USDA provides critical financing for water systems that are unable to secure commercial credit. In FY11, USDA obligated over $1.3 billion in loans and grants to 695 water and wastewater projects. 82% of those funds were used for projects in communities with populations of 5,000 or fewer. And even though over the last 72 years, USDA has made over $30 billion in water infrastructure loans to communities that others would not, the lifetime default rate for this program is a meager 1.02%. In addition to infrastructure financing, USDA's water program also provides funding for technical assistance to rural communities. This on-site assistance provided by circuit riders and wastewater technicians is critical to ensuring that the rural communities have sustainable water and wastewater systems. We strongly encourage the committee to reauthorize the circuit rider program. We believe the Farm Bill should maintain the water program's current policies Funding should be limited to rural communities who are unable to find affordable credit elsewhere. Funding should be targeted to rural communities with the greatest economic need and environmental public health challenges. And grants should be awarded based in proportion to a community's economic need. We are aware of discussions to expand USDA loan and grant eligibility to more populous communities. We believe the water program's current focus on communities with populations of 10,000 or less is working. Currently, 82% of USDA's water infrastructure funding goes to communities with populations of few thousand or fewer. Even though funding has been awarded to smaller and poorer communities, the current backlog is still over $3 billion. We do not believe anything is to be gained by increasing the pool of eligible communities for water infrastructure loans and grants. In fact, we are concerned this could result in fewer loans and grants for truly needy rural communities, and that the increase in applications could place a substantial burden on a shrinking rural development field staff, thereby delaying all loan and grant approvals. Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Costa, this concludes my testimony, and I'll be happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Dunmire. Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee for allowing me the opportunity today to discuss the importance of rural development programs and the upcoming Farm Bill reauthorization. My name is Robert Stewart, and I'm representing the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, a national nonprofit network of regional service providers that for over 40 years have provided on-site technical assistance and training services to rural communities in every state regarding water and wastewater facilities, waste disposal, affordable housing, and community economic development. The importance of RD infrastructure programs to current rural economies and for future economic development cannot be overstated. In particular, rural water and wastewater utilities are the critical foundation upon which rural communities and families depend for their health, their livelihoods, and their prosperity. Virtually all economic activity in rural America, whether it's farming and ranching, value-added commodity processing, oil and gas production, mineral activities, alternative energy pursuits, or tourism, depend on sustainable rural communities and utilities. It's been RD programs that have provided rural America with vital infrastructure, business development opportunities, and a range of technical assistance programs that promote productive and sustainable economies. RCAP works directly with RD staff in helping rural communities funding application requirements, to implement proper management practices, to ensure financial accountability, and provide operational assistance. Due to a limited customer base and typically lower median income, many small rural communities are unable to finance major infrastructure improvements without some federal assistance. Unlike larger communities that can access the municipal bond market or other private financing options, these small rural communities have turned to RD as the lender of last resort. RD has responded by providing over 18,000 active water and sewer loans serving more than 19 million rural residents, as previously mentioned, with basically a non-existent default rate. Although challenged by reductions in every state, RD staff continue to provide services that respond to local needs. Whatever the situation, rural community leaders benefit from being able to turn to a local RD staffer, an RCAP technical assistance provider, or a Rural Water Association circuit rider that they know and trust who is familiar with their system. To build on these successes, the Farm Bill should reauthorize the water and wastewater loan and grant programs, the technical assistance and training grant program, the essential community facilities program, and the water infrastructure revolving loan program at or near the levels in the current Farm Bill. Despite RD's many successes, a substantial number of small, low-income towns and counties have difficulty fully accessing and complying with RD regulations. The application process and eligibility requirements for each program are slightly different, and each poses unique challenges. Local leaders are most often volunteers, and meeting RD loan requirements can be a complex and time-consuming process. However, with help from an experienced technical assistance provider, even communities with no paid staff and limited planning resources can develop the local capacity to apply for and manage needed infrastructure projects. While there are many calls for reducing the loan requirements, the requirements for accessing loans, RCAP's experience is that these requirements are for the most part necessary to ensure that the federal government is making financial support available only to the neediest communities while ensuring the security of the federal investment. The extremely low default rate on these loans is a testament to the efficacy of existing requirements. One area for improvement might be to have common environmental review requirements among all federally financed infrastructure programs. Oftentimes, projects have multiple funding sources with varying environmental review and assessment requirements. The existing technical assistance and training grant program has been so successful that many state RD offices and local community officials have repeatedly asked RCAP to assist with other non-water related RD funded projects, in particular the Essential Community Facilities Program. Community facilities constitute an important foundation for rural community growth and job creation. A CF technical assistance and training program can ensure that these facilities are planned for, constructed, operated, and managed in an efficient manner that benefits the entire community and promotes economic development opportunities. There's been an increasing emphasis on regionalization, as we have already heard today, which RCAP supports, and we would propose that borrowers demonstrate to RD, this is particularly on the water and the wastewater side, their efforts towards regionalized service provision as part of the application process. In addition, higher priority should be given to regional applications, especially those resulting in consolidations or collaborative service delivery. RCAP's experience, however, has been that regionalization is most often successful when a technical assistance provider is able to spend time with all the entities involved to offer alternative approaches, assist in the evaluation of costs and benefits, identify funding sources, prepare necessary documentation, and promote public education and outreach. There are some proposals being discussed, as we've heard today, to standardize the definition of rural in all RD programs. While this might seem reasonable, any effort to increase the size of eligible borrowers under the water and environment programs above a 10,000 population would severely jeopardize what is basically the only source of federal funding for small community infrastructure needs. If the definition is expanded, many of our nation's smallest communities will be unable to compete for RD water and sewer infrastructure funds with much larger towns, placing them at a competitive disadvantage for the one program that was designed especially for their unique needs. I'll end my remarks here and hope that you will review my written statement for additional information and ideas on the RD title in the Farm Bill. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here and would be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Rozelle.
Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Costa, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. My name is Dave Rozelle, and I am an Executive Vice President with Suddenlink Communications. Suddenlink is a leading provider of cable video services, high-speed internet access, wireless home networking, wireline phone, online video, home security services for hundreds of communities, approximately 1.4 million households, and thousands of commercial customers across 11 states. Suddenlink primarily serves second-tier communities such as Lubbock, Texas, Charleston, West Virginia, Jonesboro, Arkansas, Lake Charles, Louisiana, and Greenville, North Carolina. However, we also serve dozens of small rural communities, some with populations below 500 people. Since 2009, we have invested $350 million above and beyond our normal capital spending levels to ensure that our customers can enjoy cutting-edge services, including high-speed internet service, which we offer to substantially all of our customers. Moreover, our investment in industry-leading DOCSIS 3.0 technology has enabled us to provide data transmission speeds up to 107 megabits to a growing number of our residential customers, some in small rural communities like Pomeroy, Ohio, and Ripley, West Virginia. I am also here today as a member of the Rural and Small System Operator Committee of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association. NCTA is the principal trade association of the cable industry in the United States. Since 1996, the cable industry has invested over $185 billion to upgrade and expand its networks to provide broadband access and now offers high-speed internet service to more than 93% of U.S. households. Suddenlink and NCTA strongly support the primary goals of rural broadband funding. Broadband is a crucial driver of economic recovery and global competitiveness, and quality broadband services should be available to all regions of the country, including the least densely populated areas of the country. Unfortunately, over the past 10 years, the implementation of the rural broadband programs by the Rural Utilities Service has not maintained that focus. The USDA Inspector General issued critical reports in 2005 and 2009, which found that, quote, the overwhelming majority of communities, 77%, receiving service through the broadband program already have access to the technology without the RUS's loan program, close quotes. Misdirecting scarce government funds to areas that are already being served means less support for areas without any broadband. It also puts existing private providers in the untenable position of having to compete against a government-subsidized competitor. Though the 2008 Farm Bill made some reforms, the RUS's new March 2011 rules still allow the RUS to approve applications that are complete overbuilds without reaching any new households which lack broadband service. We respectfully submit that the new Farm Bill should take strong steps to direct taxpayer dollars where they are most needed. Specifically, as this subcommittee considers reauthorization of the legislation, we urge you to consider the following 4 proposals. First, limit funding to substantially unserved areas. To ensure available funds are used effectively, the RUS broadband support loans, loan guarantees, or grants should be limited to areas where at least 75% of residential households lack access to broadband service. Second, seek additional information. To ensure compliance with this proposed eligibility standard, the Secretary of Agriculture should be required to give existing providers an opportunity to voluntarily submit information about their service areas that may overlap areas proposed to be served by the applicant. This was done in the stimulus program. Third, prioritize support to areas most in need of it. The Secretary should continue to give priority to the RUS broadband loans or grants that will extend broadband service to areas with the greatest proportion of unserved households. Finally, increase accountability. Each entity receiving RUS broadband support should be required to report quarterly on its use of the funds and its progress, and those reports should be available online. That was done by the Department of Commerce in the stimulus program. Suddenlink and NCTA share your goal of bringing broadband to every rural household. A well-administered broadband loan program is an important part of reaching that goal. Including our 4 proposals will help ensure that the program stays focused and on track to do so. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, and I appreciate your willingness to consider ways to ensure broadband funds are spent in the most effective way possible for all Americans. I look forward to taking your questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Bonson.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson, Ranking Member Costa, and the rest of the committee. I appreciate the invitation to participate in today's discussion. For the past 4 years, I've served as CEO, General Manager of the Bloomingdale Telephone Company, headquartered in Bloomingdale, Michigan. My remarks today are on behalf of Bloomingdale, as well as NTCA, APASCO, and WTA, and their small community-based members that provide a variety of communication services throughout the rural far reaches of the nation. America's 1,100 rural telecom providers serve only 5% of the U.S. population, located in approximately 40% of the nation's geographic landmass. Bloomingdale employs 25 people, and our 2011 annual operating revenue was about $5.9 million. We offer 1.5 megabit broadband to 100% of our area, with much faster speeds available to the majority of our customers, currently up to 20 megabits. Rural providers are community-focused. Bloomingdale partnership with RUS has produced countless opportunities, whether it's the fiber that we laid in Paw Paw, Michigan, exchange that can deliver 100 megabit internet service to the local schools and the county courthouse, or the customer who no longer has to travel over 8 hours a week to the University of Michigan Hospital in Ann Arbor for his heart condition. He can now have the tests over fiber done in his home. Ever since Bloomingdale began its operation in 1904, we've been proud to serve as the only provider to some of the most rural areas of Michigan, while the larger carriers chose to serve only the most profitable and densely populated towns. The American economy runs on broadband, in an area moving from no broadband providers to 3 broadband providers during the years 1999 through 2006. They realized a 6.4% employment growth on average, yet only about half of rural Americans currently subscribe to broadband at home, and half of the small businesses are dissatisfied with their internet speed. USDA's Economic Research Service reports that over the past decade, the rural population has grown at less than half the rate of metropolitan population. RUS rural development programs, coupled with ongoing support, are essential to delivering the broadband that will empower rural Americas to reverse this trend. RUS telecommunication programs have been a success story by providing reliable access to capital that helps carriers deliver affordable voice and broadband service to millions of Americans where it would not otherwise be available. Unfortunately, the momentum and economic development achieved in recent years with the help of RUS lending is being put at risk as a direct result of the regulatory uncertainty created by the FCC's ongoing Universal Service Fund and intercarrier compensation reform proposals. RUS financing works hand in hand with ongoing USF support to meet the national statutory mandate of quality, reliable telecom service in high-cost rural areas where low customer density, vast distances, and rugged terrain deter even the most optimistic business cases. Removing or weakening one piece of that puzzle threatens the provision of telecom service area in rural America and puts millions of RUS loans at risk of default. For example, Bloomingdale completed a $4.4 million RUS broadband loan project in 2010. That project will net RUS nearly $2.5 million in interest when we've completed the repayment. RUS lending remains essential to broadband deployment. Indeed, 14 million Americans still do not have 4 megabits broadband available. Only 79.2% of rural Americans have access to speeds greater than 6 megabit, and 70.8% are fortunate to have speeds greater than 10 megabits. 10 megabits would be what is commonly considered necessary for rural areas to compete in a modern broadband world. NTCA and its partners representing the rural telecom industry welcome discussion about ways to improve RUS telecom programs. In short, we're concerned about making further changes to a broadband program that has been at a virtual standstill for 4 years, especially if reforms are designed to cut out lending to areas that still lack broadband. Further, technology neutrality dictates that the same data transmission requirements must apply to wire and wireless networks. Priority should be given to applicants proposing scalable projects, meaning those that can be easily and relatively inexpensively upgraded over time to reflect the increased consumer demand for more bandwidth. We can't accomplish our broadband goals without granting some discretion to the Secretary, who can then adjust based on the endless variety of circumstances presented by applicants. Serving every American is not a simple undertaking, and RUS lending should be the focus on ensuring that everyone has access to robust, reliable broadband over the long term. Regardless of whether consumers are focused on voice, video, or data, they will require the underlying infrastructure to ensure that their communications get to its destination. The rural industry has long been a leader in deploying advanced telecommunication services to America's rural areas, and that success is built upon a foundation of public-private partnership, and that's worked for decades. Rural providers and the rural associations are eager to continue to work with you to make broadband universally available as envisioned by many and mandated by a statute. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Thank you. I'm going to go out of order and allow the ranking member who has other legislative commitments to ask a couple questions, and then we'll take the rest in order. Mr. Costa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bonson, I think you confirmed what I said in my opening statement about the challenges of capacity for broadband and the availability of broadband in our rural communities. And I'm wondering if I've got numbers here that said 95% of households it's available, but the take rate is only 60%, and that instead of subsidizing competitors, because I appreciate the public-private partnership that you spoke of in your closing statement, in areas where broadband's already available, shouldn't the money be better focused on providing underserved areas going forward to provide access? And could you also talk about broadband width and access for agriculture for new technologies?
Well, the area I serve is very agriculture. A lot of blueberry farmers, cherry farmers, peach farmers, apple farmers, and they use our technology everywhere now. We are talking about doing specific builds to packing plants for just those purposes. So I would absolutely agree with you that it's crucial for those areas. Getting that service to those areas is extremely expensive, and without help from outsourced sources, it's very difficult for us to do that. You just can't really build a business case to take a facility to a place where there just aren't a lot of people there to buy that service from you.
Dave Russell, do you want to comment on this or not? You don't have to.
in that case, I'll pass, given the time constraints.
Okay, I appreciate that. Finally, my last question. Mr. Dunmeyer with NRWA, you talked about the importance, and the previous witness did, of safe drinking water and where these grants and loans have provided a positive role. And I have a number of communities like that. But I have a different question. And some of the communities that, in terms of compliance with federal regulations or regulatory regimes under the Environmental Protection Agency, not just with this administration, but with previous administrations. I mean, this has, I think, been a bipartisan problem. When you have naturally occurring contaminants like arsenic or benzene, when 30 years ago we could trace parts per million, but then now we developed ability to turn parts per billion, and now parts per trillion. It just seems to me that the amount of water you got to consume to be impacted by parts per trillion is rather unimaginable that it would impact your health issue. And instead of zero risk, and there's no zero risk, in terms of protecting health and safety, I mean, I've had communities that have had to drill new wells at $1.5 million a copy. For a small community, that's a big price tag. When, you know, the water's been that way for millions of years. It's not because of I mean, in some cases we have contamination that we created with the likes of DBCP and other kinds of things with past practices. But it just seems to me change in the regulatory regime would be more helpful than trying to create some sort of a zero tolerance.
Ranking Member Costa, you're preaching to the choir. That has been our argument with the primacy agency in Illinois, which is IEPA. For years and years and years, they approached it with a commonsensical view, and a number of years ago, they went through an audit from US EPA. It was not a pleasant audit. Our friends in Springfield at IEPA now are forced to enforce the US EPA regulations without any waivers, no common sense to it. Like you pointed out, there's been countless systems, predominantly in north central Illinois to northern Illinois, that have the radon problems, arsenic problems, that have been forced to put in added treatment, very, very expensive added treatment, essentially doubling and tripling the water rates of their customers.
Yeah, let me just close it, and we, I think, on a bipartisan basis, need to figure out how to work this. Common sense tells you that in any sort of risk assessment and risk management regime, that you got to assess the management of the risk versus the assessment of how big of a risk it is. And on a cost comparative basis, and this is the common sense that gets lost, we never take into an evaluation the criteria on how do we get the best bang for our buck, whether it be federal, state, or local dollars, on limiting the risk to our communities where we have a responsibility to minimize the risk. But certainly, we never look at it in a vacuum. When a person gets in a car and backs out of their driveway, they're much more likely to have a higher risk of an accident, God forbid, that would result in injury. And we accept that risk versus how much water you have to consume daily for 80 years on tracing parts per billion of naturally occurring arsenic that's been in the water forever. So I'll get off my soapbox, but it's a challenge that we have to, I think, address in some fashion.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. I'll defer my one question to the end. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Rozelle, I live in a small community and that's very close to a larger community. And you've been fairly critical of the RUS loan program, and one of the words you continue to use is unserved. Would you give me the definition of unserved, and specifically what I'm getting at here is unserved versus underserved?
Congressman Scott, the National Broadband Plan defined broadband as 4 megabits down, 1 megabit up.
Okay.
If a household doesn't have that available to it, passing it, then it would not have broadband under the National Broadband Plan definition.
Okay. Would you agree that there is much more competition in metropolitan areas than there is in rural areas?
I would agree that generally in larger communities, there are more carriers providing broadband service than there are in rural communities. Yes, sir, I would agree with that.
And would you agree that in those competitive markets that because of the competition, the consumer pays less for the same service than they do in the more underserved areas of the state?
Congressman Scott, I would say this in relation to Suddenlink, with I am obviously very familiar, and that is that we've spent a great deal of money to bring high-speed, very high-speed broadband as deeply as we could into our footprint in terms of densities. And in our smaller communities, which have broadband, some of those communities pay more on a equivalent service basis than our larger communities, and some pay less.
My experience, and I certainly believe you to be telling the truth, but my experience has been that in the rural parts, I paid significantly more than I paid at my business, for example, which was actually in a competitive market, and my home was in the rural market. I did not have a choice in providers at my home, but I had a choice at the business, and I paid significantly less for the service.
In most of our markets on the broadband side, we are competitive with the incumbent telephone company generally. And in a number of them, we're also competing with other providers, select providers who are present. And so with all due respect, it really depends on the community as to the level of competition that we face.
Where I'm from, I've seen a very serious reluctance of major corporations to move into the more rural parts. It seems to me that they, if you will, cherry pick the more profitable areas, and that may be part of their business strategy, where your local rural telephone company, which is traditionally family owned, is willing to serve and more community oriented.
Suddenlink began life as a company that served entirely rural communities and grew to be the company that we are today. So I certainly understand what you're saying, and I represent here a group of operators at NCTA, some of which serve extremely small communities, and they are also family-owned.
Thank you very much. Mr. Batson, would you like to comment on the loan program and the value it adds to bringing competition into the rural markets, or to the rural consumer?
Yeah, to go back to your earlier question, I would just say yes. It's cheaper when there's competition, there's no doubt about it. We couldn't do the things that we've done in my company if we wouldn't have had RUS as a partner. It just wouldn't be possible. You just can't make the money work. I need that kind of help to serve the people we're trying to serve. And the area I'm in is extremely small. I mean, the towns that others have talked about would be considered pretty good-sized towns to the town I serve in.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I don't have any time remaining, but I'll yield it back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Hartzler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe you were here the first panel and heard my questions about the needs for rural infrastructure and the challenges we have there. And in your testimony, Mr. Dunmeyer, I see that you outline a little bit some of the demand and the amount of money that was allocated for rural infrastructure projects, and as well as outline that at the end of 2011, there were 415 completed applications which no funding was available. And to address the backlog, you think we need $3 billion. Is that correct? Or was, yeah.
Yes, ma'am. That's the applications that were in process total up to that $3 billion.
Of those applications, could you give me a rough estimate of, kind of break down the causes for the need for it? Some is just the aging of the infrastructure, the water lines, the sewer lines were put in place in the 50s and 60s, wouldn't you say? I mean, part of it is just aging, or I would really want to know how much you think is due to the EPA's ever-changing standards that are putting a new burden on our rural communities and forcing them to have to upgrade their sewer systems and their water systems. Can you give me some sort of a breakdown in the cause for the needs of these projects?
Yeah, I wish I could give you an answer here today, but unfortunately I cannot. But I will promise you this, we will check into that and we'll get the information to you as soon as possible. But it is a combination of all of the factors that you have just mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Certainly we can't do anything about the aging, but the projects in my district, the ones that frustrate me the most is when you have a system that is working, and the ranking member Costa alluded to it, it's safe, it's working, and then here the government comes in and says, you need to upgrade your sewer plant, or you need to do this, or you need to do that, which has cost millions of dollars, which these small towns don't have. And then it's forcing a burden on us as a federal government to have to have the resources to help supply that. And so if we could if you could help provide us with some of that information, it gives us the tools we need to be able to fight back here, and to try to push for common sense regulations that will ensure safety, but yet also use our tax dollars wisely. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate what all of you are doing for rural America. As a farm girl from Archie, Missouri, I appreciate all the what we can do for rural America. Thank you.
Okay, if you would allow just 1 second
Well, sure.
to respond. You know, the water operators and wastewater operators that I represent, there's nobody out there that would want to step up to the plate and make sure the water is more safe to drink, sure, and the effluent of their wastewater plants is not damaging the environment than the operators that I represent. However, when it comes to and I use this term not lightly, frivolous regulations that seem to be coming our way, you know, it just gets to be too hard of a job for the small municipalities out there.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now I'll get off my soapbox.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sarsa.
Thank you.
And my friend from Illinois, Mr. Schilling.
Thank you, Chairman, and I also want to thank you for your great service, not only to our state, but also to our country, and you've been a great leader on the Ag Committee. So first, like to address Mr. Don Meyer. First, it's great to see you again, sir. I just want to thank you for the great work you do for our rural communities, and I know that we serve, I think, over 1,700 total is the amount throughout the state, so thank you for that. I think everyone in the room is aware of our fiscal situation. We've cut our own budgets here in the House by 12%. I think the ag community has really stepped up to the plate when it comes to spending and saving debate, so it's great. But with that in mind, with the limited resources we have, how would water applications fit into the regional concept discussed today, particularly in the light that what we've talked about is the $3 billion backlog?
Was that directed towards me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I believe a little bit of a Band-Aid approach has already been put in place. Back in August of last year, USDA and EPA, US EPA, I should say, signed a memorandum of agreement on improving sustainability of rural water and wastewater systems. And a key component of that is the promotion of system partnerships. As Mr. Costas pointed out earlier, you know, this is not a one-size-fits-all. And there are instances in the state of Illinois where we don't really call it regionalization as more as a consolidation. And sometimes it's more economically feasible to look at your neighbors. If they're experiencing the same problems, they're going to have to build a water treatment facility or a wastewater treatment plant. It makes all the sense in the world to build one a little bit bigger, cost effective. Not always do they see eye to eye. And this is where Mr. Stewart was alluding earlier, that sometimes it takes somebody to take them by the hand, lead them from cradle to grave, get them in the same room together, get them talking. And, this isn't you against me. This is a common goal that's going to ultimately save both of our municipalities and our customers, if you will, money.
Very good. Thank you for that. Mr. Bonson and Mr. Roselli, we have several cable and telephone cooperatives in our district, including McDonough Telephone Cooperative and then Mid-Century Telephone Cooperative that serve thousands of miles of rural area in western Illinois. I meet with them quite regularly, and it seems every time I do, they constantly have a new rule or regulation coming from the FCC that could potentially prevent broadband expansion. This doesn't provide them for much certainty to invest in new technology or to expand their broadband access. How much of the reluctance for investment inferred by the studies you mentioned in your testimony is actually due to the FCC reforms? Sure.
I think probably the best example I can give you is I was recently at a managers meeting of small telephone companies. There's probably 100 plus managers there. As we talked about what's going on, I think probably the common thread was we don't know what's going on right now. We just can't make investments. It's not a good idea for our company. And that's pretty scary because we were talking earlier about 4.1 in terms of those speeds. My consultants tell me by 2015, consumers are going to want 100 megs at their house. I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, we've got a huge challenge in front of us, and we're afraid to make the investments to get there.
Very good. With that, I yield back my time.
Any second round? I know Mr. Costas. We thank you. I want to conclude, I guess, by thanking this panel and the other panel for their testimony. I would ask, are there any members of the first panel still here? I don't believe there are. Okay, all right. You can even feel free, even though it's not in order, to respond to my concluding question if you desire. As I listened to the testimony today, first of all, I was impressed by your breadth of understanding, your commitment to values that I think, frankly, most of this members of this subcommittee on both sides share. And I'm grateful for your being here. What occurred to me is that we're here to talk about the formulation of the 2012 Farm Bill Rural Development Programs. Excellent testimony, and I appreciate it. But we all recognize, I do, you do, and every member of the subcommittee does, that this subcommittee and the other 4 subcommittees, or 5 of the Ag Committee, as well as every committee in the U.S. House and Senate, is going to have to engage in what we collectively call, or individually call, shared sacrifice. We're not going to balance the budget. We're not going to deal with the deficit and the debt unless we all recognize that every single component of what the federal government does has got to be reexamined. So my question for you is, as articulate as you've been on advocating for programs that still cost money, if you were in my position or the position of anybody in Congress or the President, where would you make cuts that will save money to engage in this whole process of shared sacrifice that's going to be necessary if we're to dig ourselves out of a $16.5 trillion hole? Any thoughts? Yes, sir.
Particularly the broadband, water and wastewater are the keys to our future success. And if we have to do without, in all due respect, sir, we now have profitability in American agriculture with commodity prices as they have been for the last couple of years and for the probably near foreseeable future. I think we can take some of the funding that have been used in that portion of the farm subsidies and anything in those areas for the Farm Bill and redirect them
into the rural development portfolio and probably have a much better impact and longer impact on rural America than a one-time check to an individual farmer. Thank you.
Thank you for your thoughts. Anything else?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Each of the individual panelists that presented up here, on their programs, they were always asked, how do you justify who gets money and who does not get money? You know, how do you weigh the need that's out there? I submit that, you know, maybe Congress should go back and look at what really is working and what does not work. And to add to the agricultural that Mr. Lawson has discussed, you know, defense is another huge elephant in the room that could probably be cut as the wars wind down.
I guess one thing I'd just like to point out is that my company fully intends to pay those loans back. And yeah, I'm using your money right now, but you're going to get it back, and you're going to get, on the one loan I talked about earlier, you're going to get $2.5 million back. And to me, that seems like a total win-win situation. The people who live in my rural area are getting the services they need now, and the government's going to get their money back plus interest. That just seems like a win-win to me.
Okay, well, I appreciate it. I appreciate the input. We've got a tough task ahead of us. I think the chairman of the committee has got an obligation to remain judiciously neutral in terms of what we're doing. I would only say, speaking on behalf of this subcommittee, I believe, and the whole U.S. House, we're going to have to make some cuts. We're going to have to make some savings, none of which are going to be painless. And I think we all need to engage in that process, or we're never going to deal with the issue that we have. So, with that, I'd thank the witnesses for their testimony. Excellent testimony today. I appreciate the great job, as always, that our majority staff as well as the minority staff do. And I don't have any concluding statement to make. Mr. Costa is going on to other legislative business, and so I would simply say that under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 days. To receive additional 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses from the witness to any question posed by a member. This hearing of the Rural Development, Research, Biotech, and Foreign Agriculture Committee subcommittee is adjourned.